Hi everyone, welcome to another tutorial of Friends of Motion, and today's tutorial is going to be very beginner friendly. You don't need to know anything about modeling or materials because we will just be using cubes and material from our content browser and one or two models that I also found in the content browser. This is going to be mainly Redshift based, but most lighting engines work kind of the same. I will add some free textures for you to download so you can follow along, because at the end we will use gobos to sprinkle some magic lights into our scene before we render it out. I will also show you how to render it out with compositing tags and object buffers so that you can composite it in After Effects with your design. Alright, with that said, let's jump in. I'm going to start with a fresh scene, but I'm going to cheat a little bit by just copy and pasting the basic geometry into my scene. And this is so basic, it's really just cylinders and procedural cubes and a cloner. And the cloner just have this thin and tall cube that is making the blinds or the room divider. And then I still have a slight rotation on my cloner just so that we can control how much light is coming through the blinds when we add the lights in Redshift. Now, very important to always make sure that your scene is world scale. So as usual, we have that little mannequin. He's like the size of a human being, and make sure that the steps and the walls and the ceiling is architecturally correct. So usually walls are around 250 centimeters. Steps are between 17 and 20 centimeters. So it's easy to just Google the size and average heights of things, and that'll always help immediately making your scene feel more realistically scaled. Deleting my little guy. Next thing I'm going to add is the background. So you can just type in back and you'll find this background that comes with Cinema 4D. I'm going to close my object browser. What I love about this background is that you can also change the curvature of the corners. So because this is a interior shot, I'm going to make this quite tight, the corner, so it feels like a room. And another thing that's great about this background is that you can change the walls, the width and the height of the walls. So as you build a scene and you come in with your camera and you realize you don't have enough geometry to the left or the right, or maybe your ceiling is not high enough, this is great about the procedural aspects of these backdrops, that you can actually just change them with a slider. It's wonderful. Also make sure that your floor is definitely on the wall. So let's just make sure they're touching. Great. And this is it. This is actually such a simple scene, and I'm sure you will be able to build this in no time. So I'm going to add just a placeholder of where I'm going to put my product. So this is where I have my laptop that I have in my scene. So my scene might be different from what you need to build. This specific reason for this scene is I wanted to show UI design that I did, but in an environment. So maybe you have a perfume bottle or set of headphones, but it all depends on what you want to show. I didn't want the outside to be very busy or distracting, so it was just supposed to be a very simple minimalist scene. Now, because I know I'm going to zoom in pretty close to my product, I decided to create a table that has a bit more geometry. So this could be totally fine just by using a cube, and you can maybe just add some roundness to the corners and then call it a day. But I am going to use the amazing content browser that Maxon so generously gave us and search for table. And the table I used was this one here. There's two of them. I think one is just I think they're the same. One is just Redshift and one is a normal standard cinema file. And I'm in the display options. I'm going to switch materials off so that I can see everything. And then what I did was, I can quickly close this. What I did was I deleted the outside. And I will always recommend, when you use Maxon's objects, it's just good to modernize it a little bit so you can make it your own and not just using it straight out of the box. And the reason I love this one is just these beautiful seams that just adds a bit of detail to the set. And when I'm starting to light it, you'll see that this specular highlights will just be beautiful. Instead of just having an extrusion on a square, just having a little bit of detail really takes it to a next level. So I love having these seams, and I even push it out a little bit, or make it a little bit more imperfect so that when we render it out, it just feels like a real table. I don't even have legs, so I think the legs, you don't even need the legs. I think it was fine just floating in the air. So that was my table. Then I'm going to go back to the content browser and search for laptop. There we go. I'm just going to add it to my table, and it's just going to float. And because this is going to be a piece that's about UI design, I don't need to show anything else but the UI. I'm also just going to delete the keys and the body and the buttons and really anything. I know that they also have a tablet here, so you can use a tablet, but they even have a phone. They have so many things in here that is just wonderful to start your scene with. So even headphones, these headphones are cool. I saw a bottle. There's like a whole bunch of bottles, shampoo bottle and wine bottle. So it's really nice to have something to start a scene with, and then you can always learn how to model something if you need to model something specific, or just buy something off TurboSquid. Anyway, so this is now good enough for me, for my UI design. The next thing I'm going to do is to add the camera, and then we can start lighting the scene. All right, so to start the camera, let's get into Redshift already. Click on my render settings, toggle down to Redshift, and then that will immediately give you this Redshift option. I'm going to go camera standard, and I'm looking through the camera by clicking on this little tiny icon. And then I also want the camera to always look at this screen. So to do that, I'm going to need a null and also a target. So the null, I'm just going to shift click on the null. Oh wait, I'm first going to click on my lid, my main lid. And then when that is selected, I'm going to shift click on the null, and that will immediately become a child of the main screen. So I'm just going to take it out again because I don't need it to be on the main screen. And then I'll move it up to the middle. I'm just guessing here, but I think that's more or less the middle. And then while I'm clicking on the camera, I'm going to click Shift C to search for target. See, I've already searched for it. So click on target. And now it's adding a target to my camera, and you need to tell the target what to target. And I want to target this null. It's always good to call your nulls something. So let's say cam null. There we go. So it's connecting or connected, and let's just test it out. Yes, so it's following the camera, or the camera is following the null. Cool, so that is good. Now I'm just going to do a quick animation. I'm going to hold down Alt, rotate, say about here. Click on the camera, coordinates, control click these coordinates. You'll see this is a very cheap way to do it, but it's just really to show you a quick thing. So it's on 0, and then I'm going to scroll all the way to 90. I'm going to hold Alt down and just rotate around, and then shift click all these coordinates, and now it should just be nice rotation. All right, and the reason I do the animation now is so I know if I'm missing any geometry or if I need to fill a hole. See this hole here? I have a feeling I'm probably need to scoot this pillar out so that I don't have a gap there. Yeah, so I think we're ready to light and texture this in Redshift. So if you don't have Redshift, you can still follow along. The basics of lighting is going to be the same for any software, Octane or Standard Renderer or Arnold, but hopefully just using my textures will also help with you with other render engines. The first thing I'm going to do is just quickly create 3 nulls and organize my scene a little. Just with the nulls, I like to make my main nulls, the icon, I like to just make it a dot, just so it looks different from the rest, and then I like to color it. I will also save you the pain of watching me organizing my project, so hold on a second. And let's start just with a simple light. So to get that light, make sure I'm in Redshift. Yes, I am just going to add a very simple dome light. So this dome light is by no means going to be my light at all. It's just to start off with, because it gives you immediate idea of what the textures would look like. So I'm going to go back to my content browser. I'm just going to use this Studio HDR that I always use because I know everybody has this in their browser. Studio 21, I think. Okay. And let's add our Redshift render. Go to Windows, Redshift RS Render View, and I'm just going to click and drag this hamburger bar and just add it here. There we go. Do a quick render to see what we're going to get. It's probably going to look funny, yes, but I think we're already on a good start. We are going to start getting our materials, and all my materials are coming from my content browser. I always see it as like almost going shopping, because you just throw a whole bunch of stuff in your shopping cart and then you'll audition it back at home and see if it works or how you're going to use it. So I already know I'm going to look for in the Redshift folder. There's a whole bunch of things, and I'm going to put on list view so I can see. And I've used Blaster Fine. Double click on that. Double click on Fine 003. There's this grooved one that is pretty cool. Plaster Rough. This one, I think I downloaded this. I don't know why I can't download these. I think you need to be on a higher tier of Maxon. I'm on the monthly subscription, so maybe. All right, I'm going to fast forward this as well. I took way too long to get all the materials, but it's basically I got a bunch of plasters, a bunch of glass, and 2 types of plastic. So 1 second. All right, so let's close that. And we're going to start with the floor, because that's the one that's screaming out that it needs help. So this texture here is actually a cinema texture, and that's why it's so shiny. So let's just delete it and replace it with my speckled plaster. And the one thing I like about these Cinema 4D textures is that they make it very clear. You don't even need to know anything about these nodes. They make it very clear where to change the color. So see here, change color. I just click on that and I change the color here. I want it to be kind of like a white, but an off-white, not a pure white. There we go. And for the walls, I am going to use, where's my walls? Here. So this is very unorthodox to just add it onto the null, but it worked for me. I would say you should probably add it to each individual one and decide what scale you want, but it was fine. Actually, I think I used the rough plaster. Where is that? Plaster rough, this one. And then I had to go back and change the color to be slightly white. And nothing is ever pure white, so always have a little bit of color in your whites. Yeah, I can see it's a little rough. I mean, it's called rough. So what I like is also just another thing that's very clear, scale here. So that just shows you how big the bump is going to be on your plaster. So I think I dialed it down to 40. Well, we can always come back once we start adding more lights. We'll will realize which ones is too much and which ones are good. So my blinds was, I think that was a plastic. Let's see. Plastic rough, maybe? And then these, I don't really know what this would be in real life, but I see it almost like a, oh, let me just get out of my camera. I see these glass more like a sculpture, like if you're a futuristic art lover, you'll have this sculpture in your house. And let's add the frosted glass. And we're gonna have to tweak this. I remember I tweaked it a little. And now for the fun one, this painting. So I didn't want a big focal point in this environment because my focal point is actually my product, but I wanted some texturing. And for this one, I used this really cool trowel plaster. Let's see. Oh no, it's not trowel. It was, let's go back. It was something else. It was, yeah, what's this one? Close that. Trowel 2. Let's add that to my painting. Yes, that's the one. It's very cool. You'll see how it's going to be even cooler when I add the light. So I'm going to add an area light just above it so that we can see the shadows. And again, pressing shift when I click on it so that it goes exactly under the painting. And then I'm just moving it up a little. And then I'm going to dial down it way down. Super subtle. And then this is now where the dome light, we don't need the dome light anymore. So I'm just going to bring the dome light down and bring this a little close, dial it up a little. So I know you would think, oh, that looks already very cool, but there's even a cooler thing you can do. And just so you know, if I'm looking at my outlines, you'll see that my geometry is very low. It doesn't really have a lot of geometry. It's got like segments 4 and 4, and I would just keep it like that. But now I'm going to add the render tag, rs object render tag. And this render tag is really magical. If you click on geometry and you override it, it will add geometry in the render view. So it doesn't add geometry here, it adds geometry in the render view. And I'm going to check this box and enable it, and minimum edge length 0 and maximum subdivisions 4. And now if you click on displacement, you will see quite a big difference in the way it displays. It does feel way more realistic. Hope you can see it with my, let me close this. So maybe, I wonder if you can see it. Well, I can see it, but it looks really cool. I also wanted to feel more abstract, like some artist did like one swoosh, bigger swoosh. So let's double click on the software, on the material, and go to the scale here. Double click. I wish this panel was embedded in here, but I have to kind of work it around. So I'm going to make it really big, like 400, maybe 600. Nice. Distortion is maybe a bit much, but I just want to show you how crazy it could go. So I'm going to move this to 5. See how deep it gets. Let's make this crazy numbers just so you can. I don't think that maximum displays change much if this bottom one is not changed. See how it gets super crazy, and you can go have really fun with this, but I am just going to keep it to 1 and 1 because this is not the focal point. It's just like a little tiny detail that adds to the realism. There we go. Right, so let's do the table. And this is a quick trick I want to show you just to quickly replace a whole bunch of textures. But I want to show you a quick way of just replacing this coffee table, because as you can see, the wood is in a few places, not just at one place. And you never know, it might be hidden somewhere in the null. So you just right click and say on the material and say select material tags and objects, and you'll see it will select all the wood that uses this texture. And I just want to replace it all at once. And I'm going to replace it with this plastic rough, I think. Oh, that's plaster. Plastic rough. And then voila, they all change at the same time. Let's do the glossy one. Let's check out the glossy one. Yeah, let's keep it like that. And then lastly, the laptop. I'm going to replace the outside with this plastic glossy and the inside with a plastic rough. So I don't want it to be too specular, since it's going to be quite, it's going to distract from the design inside. All right, so I think everything has a texture on now. And I guess we'll find out once we start adding more lights, but this is pretty cool. Let me close my materials. Save, just in case I crash. And of course I just crashed, but I am back. So this scene is pretty straightforward right now. Doesn't really have much art direction in it. And now we are going to go into creating the mood or the vibe. And that is what we're going to use the area lights for. So first thing I'm going to do is just switching off these lights and using one of the lights, the one from the painting. I'm going to just move this guy up. Have one light on. I'm just going to control drag and duplicate it. And then just move it underneath. R for rotate. E for move. And just move it right under behind my blinds. Like this. And let's get that other view out again. This one. And I'm going to lock the screen again. Make sure we can see the camera view. Face the camera, this light, and I want to see this light, so I'm going to add the visible checkbox under the object tag. And also this one I want to be a color. So you can have the color, either pick a color, or you can be very professional and just use the Kelvin temperature. But since I'm a visual person, I really like to see the color. So I like to use the color picker. And for my test, I did this light to be quite vibrant and warm, so like a red-orange color. And we can add quite a lot of intensity to this one. And then I'm going to move it just so I find a cool spot where it looks nice. And then also the clones, these little blinds of mine, they're now hidden under a null, but you can just hover over your object tags and press S for search. That's how I remember it. And it will jump to your blinds and it will select my blinds. And then I just quickly move around with this rotation a little bit, just so that I can sort of find a good spot where the light is showing, but it's not too much. And it's just nicely breaking up the shadows and adding some diffusion. So I think that's quite nice. Next is going to be another light, and that is going to be a light that's slightly cooler. So I'm just going to control drag again and move this light to the right. If I remember correctly, I think it was, oh, I keep moving this scene and I don't want to move this scene. Let me just move it back. This scene is what I want to move. And then what I did was, I think it was somewhere here in the corridor. And I don't want to see this light, so I'm going to switch it off. And the color I want to be sort of like a complementary color. And the way to get the complementary color, you click on these two arrows, you click on the circle, you click on these two lines for the lollipops, and then you'll get the complementary colors. You'll see as I change this, the color will change. And the blue is just going to be this blue here, so I'll double click and it will be blue now. And this is where I know by the book this is the complementary color, but I also feel like art direction is sometimes just you follow your intuition. So for me, this is a little bit maybe too blue, and I would like to add maybe a tiny bit of purple and not as bright, not as saturated. So just subtly a blue. And I also don't want it to touch that wall. So let's just lift it up a little and maybe a little bit brighter. Cool. So I think this is now great with the color. And I think that also shows nicely, that's a great thing about telling a story with lights. And the story here is a very loose story. I wouldn't say it's very deep, but the idea is that we suggest that there are other worlds outside of this room. So it's not just 4 walls. We are suggesting that there is a corridor that leads maybe to a bedroom, or maybe on the left here, there's a swimming pool, or maybe behind the camera is a big window that has a big forest outside. So to tell that little story, the best way is to suggest it with lights or shadows. And that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to add the magic lights, as I call it, but it's just me. It's actually called spotlights. So I'm going to start with the first spotlight. And this first spotlight is going to suggest that there is a plant behind the camera. And to do that, I'm going to use something called a gobo. It's short for go between optics. It's also a word people use in film industry, where the DOP, director of photography, are using it to break the light up, to also suggest shadows, and exactly what I'm doing right now. It's just a digital version of it. I'm going to add the gobo into my texture. And these textures, by the way, will be available for you to download for free, that I will link in my description. And I will scroll all the way down, find it. It's this kind of like a palm pot plant. And I just made it in Photoshop. It's really very simple. I'm gonna add it to my scene, and you'll see it's very sharp, too sharp actually. And all you need to do is just go to details, check this little softness effects gobo box, and just dial this way up. I think it was 5 that I made it. And then I also like to add it just like a little bit like an angle. So R for rotate. Let's see. It's very subtle. Really, I think I'm even going to dial down the exposure so it's not so bright and defined. So let's bring it down, the exposure. Just like this. Nice. All right, the next magic light / spotlight is going to be my fake caustics. So let me duplicate by control dragging the spotlight and move it to where I want it to be dropped. And if you know, maybe you don't know, but Caustics is very expensive to render. It takes forever, and it's also hard to direct, because if you want to have the Caustics at a specific spot or a specific shape, you always need a light or glass or water, and it's just really tricky to control. So I just love adding it to my gobos, and that way I can create whatever I want. And it's also very cheap to render. So double positive on gobos. So let me add the caustics or caustics. This one will also be available to download for you. And this is actually going to be an animation. So I'm going to select the first one, and I'm just going to say no. Then in the texture, the way to activate the animation, and you don't need to use the animation, but I think animation is pretty cool. You are just going to load it here. You're going to say it's a loop, and you're going to give the frame range or detect frames. I think it will find, yes, it will know how many frames there are. There are 240 frames. And let me crank up the exposure for you so you can see. Ooh, look at that. Isn't that just gorgeous? Love it. And actually, let me just bring the cone angle a little smaller, just so we can have more control of where it falls. Because remember, we're not really going to zoom. We're not really going to have such a wide camera lens. We're going to be quite close to the product. So you're not really going to see it if it's so wide, or maybe you will. Let's see how far we can get this out. And then up. Yeah, maybe it's a bit too much, but I always feel like you can never have enough rainbow. So let me just, I can dial it down a little. And let me show you the animation. I hope it shows up. Yeah, see how beautiful the movement is? Very flowy. I kind of imagine it's either a chandelier on the left or behind the camera, or maybe it's a swimming pool that has some movement, or a aquarium. It's just like these little stories you tell, or I tell myself in my head. But yeah, better than just having no lights. And then actually that's my point now. I think almost we don't even need this light here. Let's see what happens if I switch it on. Yeah, maybe. But I feel like it's more impactful without it. The dome light I think we do need, because sometimes you need to fill some of that shadows, feels a little dark. So it could be really low, like 0.05, maybe 4. But yeah, this looks pretty nice. One thing I did do differently is in my original, I animated the color of the light. So in the beginning, I made it very dark, and the lights are this cold blue and purple. And then as the animation go to the end, it becomes warmer and brighter. And it's kind of to mimic time difference, but also, you know, in apps, they have a day mode and a night mode. So it was kind of to mimic that idea. The gobos are really powerful. I had so much fun making them. There's a tutorial that I followed from Stephan HKA, and I will also link his tutorial to show you how to make these gobos in After Effects. It's almost like a fun project by itself. And yeah, so let's wrap this up, and I'll show you how to render it out in to After Effects to add your design. All right, let's get to the admin. And with admin, I mean getting your scene ready for After Effects by rendering, creating object buffers, adding compositing tags. Kind of boring stuff, and it's my least favorite thing, but it's very important because it will definitely help speed up your work process, but also just overall make your quality of life way better by preparing your scene in the most efficient way. Let's go to my render settings, my Redshift render settings. Make sure your AOV has a name and it's enabled. I'm going to quickly jump through my settings in my render. My threshold is pretty high because I just want a quick render, but I do have denoise on so that so it doesn't look too bad and too noisy. Then these are just standard settings. Usually I put global illumination at brute force 16. Caustics are off because we have fake caustics, and AOV is enabled, and that is basically set up there. In my savings, make sure that your multipasses are EXRs because we're going to need the EXR. Usually I just save out PNGs for my beauty pass. And I'm going to first show you how to do this compositing project file, which is called a .aec, and this is how you get the data to After Effects. So the first thing we're going to do is I want to split up this screen so that the screen inside and the outside are two different pieces of geometry. So a very quick way is just to click on my polygon editing mode, click on the middle of the screen, right click and say split. And now we have two pieces of geometry. I'm going to call this screen, and this part is going to be the frame. And that's nice. So it's now two separate pieces of geometry. There's already a Redshift render tag on it, but if you don't see it, just right click and say render tags, rs object. And this is basically just to give each of them an object ID. So this object ID is going to be, I'm just going to give it a high number 12, this one 13. And the reason I make these high numbers is because if I do a 1 or a 2, there might be another 1 or 2 hidden somewhere in these nulls. So a 12 and a 13 is just a safe number to pick, I feel. And then we are now going to create the object buffer. So with the object buffer, we are adding it to an AOV manager. So AOVs are exactly like object buffers in the standard renderer. And all you do is you pick what you want to render and you just drag it into this middle bit. And then when you click on it, you will, so we're going to use a puzzle mat, but there's other ways of getting a mat, like there's crypto mats, and I know that you can add a mat here in the render settings, but the easiest one for me is the puzzle mat. And a puzzle mat, as soon as you add it, and let's add the object ID, you can also make a puzzle mat according to material IDs, but we're just going to do a very easy, quick object ID. You'll see that the puzzle mat will appear here in the drop down in your Redshift render view. And to view this, you have to have it in bucket mode. And obviously you won't see anything yet because you haven't told it which project ID to use or object ID to use. And I'm having 12 and 13. So let's say 13 and 12. And let's just toggle. I realized we have to toggle this up and down before you see anything. And there we go. So that is the frame. And the reason the screen is not working, and this took me forever to figure out, drove me nuts. It's such a silly little thing, but oh man, these little tiny things. Basically, when I split it up, the screen just moved a pixel back. So you couldn't see it was hiding behind the frame. It's such a silly thing, but oh man, drove me nuts. All right, so you have both of them now, but I only did this so that you can see how to do it if you want more than one object buffer, but we don't need all this object buffers for what we're going to do. I'm just really going to make it super simple for you, going back to my manager, and I just want the inside, which is what's the inside? 12. So make sure inside is 12, yes. So I'm going to make all these channels 12, and that way they all are going to be white, because it's RGB combined is white. Nice, so that is a very simple black and white Luma mat that you will render out. And you're going to render out an EXR, and we're going to bring it into After Effects. And then last thing we need to do is we need to create a compositing tag for our screen. And I'm going to right click, render tags, Cineware. I think it used to be called external compositing tag, or it had a different name. I can't remember exactly the name. And when I export it, I want to make sure that it is a solid. And let's make the solid small. It's always funny. These solids always come in super big in my case. I don't know why. The last thing we do is saving out a .aec file to get all the data. And I'm clicking on my render settings, save. And I've already rendered this out before, so I'm not going to render it out again. I'm just going to meet you in After Effects to show you how to bring in the .aec. So before you can bring in the cinema file, the AEC file, you need to make sure that you have the extension. So very easy to find. Go to your Maxon Cinema 4D folder in your programs file, scroll down to Exchange plugins, double click, go into After Effects, importer. I'm not sure how it looks on a piece on an Apple, but I'm pretty sure it's similar place. And then you are going to copy this into your After Effects plugin. So go to Support Files, Plugins, and then Extensions, and you just copy this in your Extensions folder. All right, so now let's go to After Effects. Cool, so we are finally in After Effects, and I'm going to show you how to bring in the AEC file. So this is my comp that I already made, but I will bring in one from scratch so that you can follow along. I'm going to go File, Import, File, and in my renders, here's all my renders, and I just saved out previous one I rendered in this folder. It was an environment 17. If you don't see this, that means you probably didn't install your plugin at the right After Effects, in the right After Effects. I know that with every After Effects update, I always get a new folder, so make sure it's in the right After Effects. This is the latest After Effects 2023. Then you'll see, so ignore these top folders, you'll get a folder with the name of your AEC file, and there's a very nice comp already created for you in the right, make sure it's the right frame rate that you rendered it out. I render it out at 30 frames a second. And I think it will always bring it out in 30 frames a second. So if you render it out at 24, make sure your interpolation is 24. And to do that, you go right click on your file, you go interpret footage and go main and change the frame rate there. All right, so now we have a render that looks very strange, but it's actually just a solid that we brought in, and see how big the solid is. Like I said, it should be small and it's still very big. And I'm going to use this to track my 2D design. And then we have the puzzle map that is red. I know you probably have a white and black one, but I'm going to do one simple step. So click on your puzzle map and search for extractor in this effect presets, double click, and it will appear in your effector control panels here. And then because we want it to be just a white and black matte, just change all these colors to red, because R, G, and B together makes red, white. So now we have a nice, let me just hide this solid. Now we have a nice, simple matte. Now the next thing, I'm just going to bring in my render, which was, I've done quite a few, which was number 17. Click on that, make sure your PNG sequence checkbox is checked here. So you bring in your sequence, and then I'm just going to drag it on top of my matte. And there we have it. And let's make sure our solid is tracking with our camera. That looks pretty good. So now let's bring in the UI. And I already made one. It's just a very simple 2D. I'll double click on that. It's just a comp that is a strange size because I couldn't figure out what is the size of the laptop screen. And it won't do anything because it's a 2D file and I have to make it a 3D file. So I click on this little icon here to make it a box, a 3D wired box. And it's going to be way out the screen, but the very easy, quick way to take this, press the parent pick whip and press Shift and Control while you're dragging it on top of the solid. And that way it will take all the position coordinates of your solid. Now let's change the size by pressing S for scale and bring this down to 2%. And then also we can hide our solid now. And let's rotate this, R for rotate, and 90 degrees. And then you're going to, I think yours will probably be fine, but I realized my null was not exactly in the middle of the screen, so I had to move it. And voila, it's stuck to the screen. Now the last thing we're going to do is just bring the matte in, or just tell it to use a matte. So I'm going to take this little pick whip, drag it to my matte, which is here, and I'm going to say Luma matte, and there we go. So if you have an older version of After Effects, I'm so glad this is a new thing. Back in the day, this was, you had to make a Luma matte for each layer you want to use, and you had to move this up above your layer to make a Luma matte, but it looks like now you don't need that, and that's pretty useful. And there you go. So what I did with my test is I made a few shots. So I did that whole process just a few times with a camera with a phone. It's just like a fake phone. And then another one with a little closer because I wanted to show the details of my UI that I designed. Oh, and actually this phone shows you a really nice example of how the Caustics is moving, which is pretty sweet. Alright, so that's all from me. I hope for the beginners that I explained well enough or slow enough. I would love to know in the comments if there is any way I can improve. And yeah, hope to see you soon. Thank you.